Okay, so we left off last time completing our model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And today we're going to talk about some different theories related to that. All right, so let's see. What were the aggregate demand shifters? What were the aggregate demand shifters? Look back in your notes there and see what you got for that. So I heard a consumption. What else? Investment, government spending, and some net exports, right? So some foreign effects. And so we got into different details, but that's good to keep in mind as we think about the things that move things around. So what we're going to spend some time on now is looking at different theories about the business cycle. So the business cycle is the ups and downs of the economy. And that was the thing we've written on the board many times. Real GDP over time tends to grow, but that growth has its ups and downs. And so we start to think about that maybe being the potential for the economy, but we inevitably seem to have these periods of highs and lows that make up that growth. And the question that economists have grappled with for at least 100 years in various ways, but especially since the Great Depression, is whether the government can play some role to smooth out the curves. So if I was to draw a different business cycle on here, one that looked like this, what would be preferred, the green path or the black path?
I'd say the green.
The green, right? So on average, we're getting the same amount of growth in the economy, but it's with less variability. Why would that be desirable to have less variability in the growth path? Hunter? Okay, good. So might make things a little bit easier to form expectations about the future, right? Because things are a little more stable. So that's a good one. You might think expectations goes with these ups and downs. Yeah. Okay, extreme recession. So if we kind of lower this down, remember, how is unemployment correlated with GDP? How is unemployment correlated with GDP? When GDP is up, unemployment is down. When GDP is down, unemployment is up, right? So it's like, I got a job, I lost my job. I got a job, I lost my job. If we can kind of add some stability that way, that would be desirable as well. Okay, so we talked about the correction that takes place in the market economy if we do dip into a recession, and that what is the great adjustment process? What are the things that adjust eventually to bring us back to maybe our potential level of GDP? What are the things that adjust? But it might take a while. Unemployment, yes, because what part of employment tends to be sticky related to employment? What did we say was sticky? Look back in your notes. This is one of the important points here. What tended to maybe be sticky with related to employment? resource costs, so wages, right? In relationship to employment, we're talking about wage rates. And wages tend to be kind of sticky. What did that stickiness mean? What adjusts first? Output prices, the shelves, the prices on the shelf, the stuff on the shelves at Walmart, or the wages that we're paying on our employees? What adjusts first? The shelf prices, right? So we imagine that there's prices that are adjusting at different rates. And it seems pretty reasonable that resource prices would lag behind output prices. So if the economy falls into recession and things aren't selling, Walmart cuts their prices in hopes that, oh, this is just a temporary thing. Tomorrow we'll be back up and we'll get sales next month up or next quarter up. But if prices continue to stay down, nobody's coming in the doors, shelf prices are down, profits are down, 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 down. Eventually they say, sorry, we're going to have to lay off some people, right? Maybe that already started that. We used to always have 10 people at the checkout lines, but now that there's not a lot of people coming through the doors, I only need 8. Somebody just lost some hours of work. They might not have lost their job, but instead of making the 40 hours a week that they were working, they get cut back to 25, right? So we might maintain, and then eventually people might start to get disgruntled with that and quit because they're not getting their 40-hour work week. So we might have a little bit of attrition going on, that people voluntarily quit before it comes to the point where Walmart actually has to lay people off, perhaps, right? So that we got this output prices adjusting first, input prices lagging behind. And that is one of the key stories going on, I guess, behind the scenes. So a guy by the name of John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes. He wrote a book in 1936 called The General Theory, in short. And this was actually his PhD dissertation. So you got to have, you gotta be pretty bold to write your paper to get your PhD and call it The General Theory. Oh, really? You're that good, huh? So The General Theory. And again, this was partially inspired by the Great Depression, which kicked off. When do people usually think of the Depression kicking off? What event happened? 28. Yeah, 29 was the stock market crash. So crash, and that kind of set off a chain of events that led us to the worst recession that we've ever had. So bad, depression. And so this last recession we had was the second worst in history. We didn't get as bad as we saw in the 1930s. So we call it the Great Recession, is what people have started to dub this last recession we were in. Okay, so Keynes in this thing thought that, the markets are driven by animal spirits. What? Quote unquote. That's kind of one of Keynes' famous things. And what he was speaking to was the volatility of markets, and that it almost appeared irrational at times that people would start to ride the wave of exuberance. And we see this in today's economy too, right? Where people maybe get excited and they're buying stuff that they don't really know much about. And so we have markets that are driven by speculation and investment. So investment is volatile. Investment tends to be volatile, and speculation and, let's just put this in quotes, maybe irrational behavior. Maybe not the wisest investments going on. his word that kind of captured that type of behavior was animal spirits. And he thought that that was a big problem in markets that drove there to be these wild swings in the business cycle. The ups and downs, again, is what we're trying to explain. All right, so then there was a little bit more to the story to get him his business cycle approach. He was the sticky wages guy. So he also thought that our wages tend to be sticky. So markets are driven by animal spirits, and wages, nominal wages, big W, wages tend to be sticky. And we might have defined that before, but what he means by sticky is slow to adjust, right? Slow to adjust, and maybe slash lag behind output prices. Lag behind output prices. See if I can actually find my notes, or I can probably just wing it just as well, but I can't seem to. I must have shoved it in the wrong spot. Aha! There we go. There we got it. So, if that's the case, the big conclusion that he had was that government could use strategic spending to offset volatile investment. All right, so in Keynes' world, if we draw the aggregate demand, aggregate supply setup, and I'm going to draw it a little bit differently, so don't jump too far ahead. What I want to do is draw a short-run aggregate supply curve that's relatively flat. And then you can kind of draw any old aggregate demand curve. Now, when we drew this before, I had a little more slope to the short-run aggregate supply curve. Right? So if I have a little more slope to it, this is kind of the way we drew it before. By drawing it flatter, we start to get larger changes in aggregate demand. If we swing out to 81 or back to 82, we start to get, if this is where we started here, we get Y1 and Y2. We start to get these highs and lows of the economy. And this flat short-run aggregate supply curve is picking up the sticky price concept. So the flat part is kind of following along with the sticky part. And so we get larger variability in output. So Keynes was the start of using government spending to offset these swings. So, for example, if there's a decrease in investment, that should lead you to a fiscal policy of having the government just spend some money to offset it. And then instead of moving out to here or here, we don't go as far, right? Because that was one of our shifters. So we're just going to use government spending as a tool, kind of like a shock absorber. All right, so that's a little bit on Keynes, and so that's why this last 5 years we've heard lots of things of, well, let's try this program, this stimulus package, let's try cash for clunkers, let's try tax credits of some sort, you know, let's try to get things moving because maybe we can spend enough money to offset that. Now, last time we learned the long run predictions for changes in government spending. And what was the long run impact on potential? How much did GDP change by in the long run if we just increased government spending? We used the Ukraine funneling some missiles and other arms over to the Ukraine. Long-term, no change, right. So in the long term, we have prices adjusting to offset that. And so we get back to the long term because only what will change our potential for the economy. Notice I didn't even draw the potential here. I'll get back to that in a second. But what were the things that changed the potential for the economy? When we do draw the long-run aggregate supply curve, it looks like this. And what are the things that make this thing move? Change in resources, change in technology. So all real things are buckets of resources. If we have a greater resource base at a point in time or with our technology of land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, if we have more resources, then yes, we can make more stuff. In the meantime, though, we've got this market system that has an adjustment in the price mechanism. Output prices and input prices are always fluctuating, and that is our great equalizer. The things that are valuable to the citizens of our island, the people here who we care about, what happens to the price of things that are of more value to them? Do they go up or down? Holding all other things constant, if something's more valuable to you, does the price tend to go up or down? Up, right? Because it's more valuable to you, you're willing to pay more for it. Even if you have a fixed income of $1,000 and you're trying to decide how much of my budget should I allocate to that Mountain Dew. Well, if you really like the taste of it and all of that, would you pay $2? Sure. Would you pay $2.25? Sure. Would you pay $3? Maybe. Would you pay $8 for your Mountain Dew? No, eventually it becomes too much. But you see how the pricing mechanism flows and equilibrates on average society's desire of the things that they put value on. That price comes through with all goods and services. But it takes a little bit of time for that to adjust. Same thing with labor. When we think about the price of what you bring to the table for your company, or what the price of a computer brings to the table for your company, that pricing mechanism, again, is the ultimate equalizer. It's going to go up or down. You're going to go up and down in value to your company. It might be things that you do right, some things that you do internally, or it might be subject to external circumstances, things that are out of your control. If you were the greatest VCR repairman in the world, you're out of a job now. Was it because you lacked skills in VCR repair? No, it's just because society went on to something else, technology changed, and the value that other people put on VCRs went down as it started to get substituted with other goods. That's the market mechanism working its way through. So I ignore the long run aggregate supply curve here because what Keynes said, another famous quote from Keynes, is that in the long run, we're all dead. That's what he said to the other economists who scoffed at him. In the long run, we're all dead. And so those classical economists, well, you know, in the long run, you're just going to be inflationary with your spending. He's like, in the long run, we're all dead. Let's do something today to correct for that. In the long run, we're all dead. Okay, so that's a little taste of Keynes and his philosophy. So another group, let's see. Yeah, let's start off with the monetarists. So monetarism. So that was the Keynes idea of what he thought happened with the business cycle. So with the monetarists, we kind of have Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman as the person leading this charge in the 60s and 70s. And he was the quantity theory of money guy, that if we increase the money supply by 10%, it leads to 10% inflation. So Milton Friedman was more of a on the classical thought of markets clearing, market prices clearing, you know, reasonably fast to restore equilibrium. So Friedman would fall into this classical thought, which is really the market clearing thing. And so what he brought to the table that was maybe a little different than past classical thought was that the money supply played a pretty important role. So there was emphasis on the money supply. And that's why we call them monetarists. And so we had the quantity theory of money, which I'll just reference. We've done that a couple times in class. Quantity theory of money. I guess if you want, we could put one quick little thing here. The MV, I kind of did a little backwards than we did in class, but the quantity of money times the velocity of money equals the price level times the real GDP. Price times quantity equals the money supply times velocity. In the long run, we're at the potential level of GDP, and velocity is about fixed. So 10% rise here leads to a 10% rise here. That was the quantity theory of money. So in Friedman's world, if we draw the monetarist picture, now this time I'd go ahead and draw the picture the way we have been, with all three lines crossing at one time. So this is what we call long run equilibrium. We'll just start her off at 100 just for fun. So you should have this graph memorized. You should know that this is long run equilibrium in macroeconomics with the goods market We got all three curves up here, and that's a long run, equilibrium. And the only thing that's going to cause it to change is one of those shifters, what we call a shock to the economy. Whether there was an increase in resource base, that might cause some of the aggregate supply curve to shift around. Change in government spending, change in taxes, change in the money supply, those might shift the aggregate demand curve around. So if the government pursues an expansionary monetary policy, are they doing stuff to raise interest rates or lower interest rates? An expansionary monetary policy. Lower, right? So if the Federal Reserve wants to try to stimulate the economy, they can increase the supply of money through one of those three tools that we talked about, and that'll drop the interest rates, causing consumers to potentially borrow some more on credit, but more importantly, trying to stimulate the business sector to invest in capital, machines, equipment, and that sort of stuff, right? So we talked about buying the John Deere tractor. So an increase in the money supply leads to an increase in aggregate demand, shifting it to AD1, or let's call it 2, AD2. And we move from point A to point B. The economy has an expansion of gross domestic product out to Y2, opening up a gap. What kind of gap? Inflationary gap, yes. So that was just a defined thing. Anytime the actual level of output exceeds potential, we call it an inflationary gap. So the other thing we talked about last time was that this is a new short-run equilibrium. The actual state of the economy is always given by the intersection of the short-run aggregate supply and the actual aggregate demand curve. So we move out to point B. What else was going on to have the economy expand from point A to point B in regard to this pricing system we mentioned before? The most important assumption that gets us out to point B is what? What is held constant? Resource prices, good. So we've been kind of picking on the wage because we care about people and we care about jobs that people have if they want them. So we've been kind of describing in general nominal resource prices by thinking about that being a big W, right? So on average, let's say people are earning $10 an hour is the nominal wage. So along this short-run aggregate supply curve, we're going to allow prices on the shelves at Walmart to climb to 103. So there was 3% inflation in terms of the price of the shelves of Walmart, our first stage effect, right? Prices changed on the shelves, but they didn't change for the employee. But we know in the long run, where is the economy headed if the invisible hand of the marketplace and market adjustment is allowed to take place? Where is equilibrium restored in the long run? Back at AD and what point? I got 3 points here potentially, or we can maybe make some new points if you want, but where is long run equilibrium restored? LAS and AD, good, right? So right there, so that's where your eyeball should take you as far as where this thing's headed if we allow the free market to make adjustments to get back to potential. again, the thought here is that we only have so much land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. These are the real things in the economy. This is the real economy going on. We can do all we want with changing the money supply, but money has no intrinsic value, right? All we had was the Federal Reserve run the printing press and print off more money. We need to get back to what we can actually do potentially in the long run with the real stuff that's out there, and that happens at point C. And so people start to think or know that we need to be here to be back to the same level of welfare that I had before, my wage to be restored, and so the short-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift, and we might see inflation rise to 5%, which means that my new paycheck is going to be $10.50. But can I buy more stuff with my $10.50 paycheck? Can I buy more things at the store? No, right? All that did was restore the purchasing power of my paycheck. All right, so in Milton Friedman's standpoint, he didn't think in the long run we're all dead. He thought that, you know what, this process is going to take place a little differently. And in fact, we're now in the 1960s and 1970s when Friedman's starting to gain a little head of steam. And we might have a little more technological advances even since 1936. And so we're starting to see maybe quicker adjustment mechanisms going on. And so if we move relatively quickly from A to B to C, is it worth doing? Friedman says no. If this adjustment process is just like, I don't know, 6 months or something, or maybe a year or whatever, certainly not in the long run we're all dead. If this process takes place pretty quickly, is it really worth doing in the first place? No, it doesn't lead to any prosperity in the long run. So don't do it. So the interesting twist that monetarism gets on is that he's all about the money supply and explaining the effects of the money supply, and his long-run conclusion was, don't goof around with the money supply. He said, don't use it as a policy. In fact, he was one of the biggest proponents of fixing the rate of the money supply. At one point, I think he threw out there, and there's some more details to talk about, but he said, why don't you just fix the money supply at 2% growth every year? So one of the key conclusions monetarist conclusion. Does not take too long. I'm not even going to pin down a time here, but does not take too long to get to the long run. And in the long run, monetary policy has no real effects, i.e. no change in potential GDP. It has no real effects. It is just inflationary. The only real effects that Milton Friedman would probably argue happened is confusion, right? Because now we don't know the exact amount, whether it's going to be 5% or 5.5%, and now we've got this government institution that's kind of willy-nilly increasing money supply, decreasing money supply, kind of trying to figure it out. And so now as a business person or as a person that's sensitive to interest rate adjustments, we're kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen to interest rates. Does that make it easier for you to plan your life or more difficult? If you don't know much about some variables like interest rate, if you're a business person, does that help you in the planning process or not? Uncertainty and confusion lead to poorer decisions being made, right? So if we could stabilize that, that would be a lot easier. And so Milton Friedman, his long run, his suggestion is to keep the changes in money supply fixed, which of course does not bode well for the Janet Yellens and the Ben Bernankes and the Ellen Greenspans out there, because it essentially puts them out of a job, right? They no longer are trying to figure out, well, should we keep interest rates suppressed now? And, you know, that whole thing about the chairman of the Federal Reserve or chairperson of the Federal Reserve being the second most powerful person in Washington, that goes down the toilet. We're going to take away all of that power by making the money supply fixed. So this was met with great resistance, of course, by the Federal Reserve and government officials in general. So if we keep it fixed, so for example, change in money supply equals, what did I say, 2%. Quantity theory of money means that inflation will be 2%. And so his whole argument was that we can keep people with a much clearer future by eliminating inflation confusion and interest rate confusion, potentially, as it relates to it. Okay. Questions or comments on that one? All right, so the last theory I want to talk about is somewhat a kissing cousin to monetarism and classical thought, but it's a little more, oh, I don't know if it's more radical, but it's called the Austrian school of thought. So, Austrian theory. So, where to start? Markets provide the most meaningful information through the price system. So they really stress the whole idea of the pricing system being pretty important. And the economy is so complex that no single mind, and what they're referring to here could be a group of minds, i.e. the government, a central planner. Let me just change that to government/central planner. Not necessarily in the communist way, although that's part of the rise of the Austrian school was out of the Cold War era and out of World War II and Hitler and all of that stuff. So it was very much a socialism versus capitalism type of growth. So no single mind can assist in making outcomes better. And so while acknowledging a need for government, similar to how Adam Smith acknowledged it, they stressed a limited government role. So more laissez-faire, let people kind of do what's best for themselves, and in doing so, what's best for society will best be served. Okay. So I got a little video here to help us see some of this. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll pass around the attendance sheet here too. That's John Maynard Keynes.
That won't be necessary. I am the agenda. Tell them I've arrived. And then tell them I've arrived.
And your name is?
Hayek.
Hayek is our Austrian. Keynes has been the mainstream thought up to this point. I'll shut up now.
Freddie. Hey, listen, party at the Fed. Lobby. John Maynard Keynes. F.A. Yeah, we're opposed. We oppose each other philosophically. In the same studio. There's a woman bus cycle and good reason to fear it. It's the animal spirit. John Maynard Keynes wrote the book on modern macro. The man you need when the economy's off track. Depression, recession, now your question's in session. Have a seat and I'll show you in one simple lesson. Boom, 1929, the big crash. We didn't bounce back, economies in the trash. Persistent unemployment, the result of sticky wages. Waiting for recovery, that's outrageous. I had a real plan, any fool can understand. The advice real simple, who's aggregate demand? C-I-G, altogether gets to Y. Keep that total growing, watch the economy fly. We've been going back and forth for a century. I want to steer markets. I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it. Play low interest rates. It's the animal spirit. You see, it's all about spending. Hear the register cha-ching. Circular flow, the dough is everything. So if the throw is getting low, doesn't matter the reason. We need more government spending. Now it's stimulus season, so forget about saving. Get it straight out of your head. Like I said, in the long run, we're all dead. Savings is destruction, that's the paradox of thrift. Don't keep money in your pocket or that growth will never live. Because business is driven by the animal spirits, the bull and the bear. And there's reasons to fear its effects on capital investment, income, and growth. That's why the state should build a gap in stimulus, both the monetary and the fiscal. They're equally correct. Public works, digging ditches, war has the same effect. Even a broken window has the glass man that has to build the multiplier, driving higher the economy's health. And if the central bank's interest rate policy takes a liquidity trap, that new money stuck in the banks, deficits could be the cure you've been looking for. Let the spending soar, now that you know the score. My general theory's made quite an impression. Revolution. I transformed the econ profession. You know me, modesty, still I'm taking it back. So say it loud and say it proud, we're all Keynesians now. We've been going back and forth for a century. I want to steer markets. I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it. I made my case straight, bitch, listen up, and you hear it. I'll begin in broad strokes, just like my friend Keynes. His theory conceals the mechanics of change. That simple equation, too much aggregation, ignores human action and motivation. Yet it continues as a justification for bailouts, payoffs, bipolar
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's all.
Well,
All right.
talking about how one of their ideas was one
We'll
prominent
see ya
looks at the
on
hotel.
Wednesday.
Like, it's in the big book, like, oh, well, clearly which one's prominent is by the one is getting at Bible's place in the hotel drawer. This is where the economy is. Well,
Oh yeah, the study session Tuesday, just like before. Yeah, so same room, and Tuesday at 7 o'clock. So same routine. I'll be sending out the practice exam here today.